Daily news and analysis. We keep you informed and inspired.
This is World Today.
China calls for staying on alert over Japan's nuclear move. The United States moves to reopen the Strait of Hormuz by force as Iran attacks the UAE. And Germany warns the European Union will retaliate if the US raises auto tariffs to 25%. Hello and welcome to World Today, a news program with a different perspective. I'm Do Hongyu in Beijing. To listen to this episode again or to catch up on previous episodes, you can download our podcast by searching World Today. Our first story. China has called on the international community to remain highly vigilant against Japan's nuclear ambitions. Chinese Representative Shen Jian made the remarks at the ongoing Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference in New York.
In
recent years, Japan has made a series of negative comments and taken questionable actions regarding the possession of nuclear weapons. It has pushed to amend its pacifist constitution, challenged the three non-nuclear principles, expanded its long-range strike capabilities, and sought the deployment of nuclear weapons on its soil from its so-called allies. The international community must remain highly vigilant, strengthen monitoring and verification, take seriously of the severe imbalance between Japan's sensitive nuclear material production capacity and its actual consumption, and resolutely curb any attempts by the country to possess nuclear weapons.
Japan has been stepping up efforts to rebuild its military, with moves that include plans to revise its pacifist constitution and easing restrictions on the export of lethal weapons. For more, joining us on the line is Rong Ying, Chair Professor at the School of International Studies at Sichuan University. Thank you very much for joining us, Professor. First of all, do you think China's move is an overreaction? Why is Japan's nuclear ambition a greater concern now than in previous years?
Well, I think China's responses or China's positions, which I think clearly and fully explained by the Chinese ambassador at the review conference of NPT, as being, I think, legitimate and also reasonable. As we know, Japan is a defeated nation, defeated state, World War II, and under the international legal sort of documents represented by the Cairo Declaration, the Boston Proclamation, the instrument of surrender of Japan. Clearly, I think all these international legal documents clearly that stipulate that Japan should be disarmed, and Japan should not allow to maintain the industrial basis or industrial capabilities to develop weapons and fighting capabilities. Of course, that is very much included that Japan would not allow to take or to be to develop nuclear capabilities, nuclear weapons or nuclear weaponizations. And this is very much to some extent, I think, represent even embodied in Japan's own constitution, the so-called pacifist constitution, and the three non-nuclear principles, which Japan again made known to the world that back in 1967. Having said that, back I think even during as early as the World War II, there was evidence, very strong evidence that Japan had made an attempt to develop nuclear weapons. Unfortunately, it didn't work out because of time. And also, I think in the post-World War II, we have seen that even according to Japanese own research, reports that Japan has never give up that attempt to develop that nuclear capability or keep the option of nuclear capabilities. So any attempts or any developments along this line have to cause concerns, I think great concerns to the region and the world at large. And not only in terms of nuclear proliferation, as we have seen, but also I think very much related to the direction, strategic direction of Japan is going to take, where Japan will be going. So very serious issues, very, I think, great development, of great concerns for the international community.
Then, how are Japan's push to revise its pacifist constitution, its lifting of the lethal arms export ban, and its nuclear ambitions interconnected?
We have seen very much, I think, the development in the past years, particularly, I think, when Prime Minister Takaichi took office, quickened the pace, accelerated development towards the remilitarization by not only raise the military budget. We have seen very recently, I think they have already, Japan has announced that they lifted the ban on arms export control so that they can not only export the lethal weapons to the outside world, but also I think would give these opportunities, capability to develop by exporting lethal weapons to develop its industrial basis for that capabilities. And we again on the nuclear issues, we have seen recently, not only I think the high-ranking officials of Prime Minister's office saying that publicly that Japan should possess nuclear weapons, and even the Prime Minister herself, Takaichi said she cannot assure that in the process of review that the three non-nuclear weapon principles, that principle will remain intact. Literally, I think this is just saying yes. And of course, the attempt to revise the pacifist constitution, which means that it will just lift or break free the legal framework for Japan to continuously pursue a peaceful road for development. So we have not seen just one simple move, rather a serious, accelerated sort of development towards remilitarization. This is again very much dangerous and worrying development.
China's representative emphasized the severe imbalance between Japan's sensitive nuclear material production capacity and its actual consumption. Professor, could you explain the scale of this imbalance? And what risks does it pose for regional security to potentially develop or possess nuclear weapons?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think according to research institutes that both, I think, in the West and of course in China, Japan has in possession of a huge amount of nuclear materials, plutonium and also uranium, which is high in intensity and also I think much more than it's needed. So there's a huge imbalance in terms of supply and need of these kind of things. We're talking about, for example, the plutonium, we're talking about 10, more than 10 metric tons that is being possessed, is stored in Japan, which will be good enough to make more than 1,300 nuclear weapons. And a lot of these materials are not under the IEA or reputed international monitoring or safeguard. So it literally raised the big question of nuclear safety, nuclear proliferation, and also the possible nuclear, I think, terrorism. And I think this is a big question again. I think the international community and of course the Chinese representative has raised. Japan got to make an answer, responded to these concerns. And the most important that I think the international community should take effective steps to ensure that Japan's nuclear capabilities, particularly these nuclear materials, should put under effective international safeguard and international monitoring.
And if Japan continues to advance its nuclear-related attempts and constitutional revision, How might this reshape the nuclear non-proliferation regime in East Asia?
Well, very much so. I think first and foremost, of course, it would undermine the strategic balance, strategic parity in the region. And Japan, as a matter of fact, it has been under the so-called, nuclear umbrella of the United States. So, and if Japan pursues its own nuclear development, as some of these right-wing forces are pursuing, and that would, in the end, I think ultimately change the strategic balance and strategic stability, undermine the stability in the region, and cause huge problem of nuclear proliferations. So I think this is very much related not only Japan's own strategic development, but also I think regional peace and stability, and specifically on the question of nuclear sort of non-proliferation issues. Japan is a member of IEA, so it also has responsibility, obligations to fulfill its obligations to the international community on the question of nuclear, non-nuclear proliferations.
And finally, building on that, what measures can the international community take to effectively strengthen the monitoring and verification of Japan's nuclear-related activities?
I think first and foremost, the international community should pay more attention to that, by keeping highly vigilant about this development. That's why I think the Chinese side called upon the review conferences to take up this issue. And secondly, I think the international community should urge Japanese government to reiterate its commitment under the NPT and then by strictly following the three non-nuclear principles. I think undertaking that Japan will not seek to develop nuclear weapons, will not seek to develop nuclear submarines, will not seek introducing or deploying nuclear weapons in Japan. This is very much important. And last but not least, as I said, that on the question of the imbalance or mismatch of the supply and need question on nuclear materials, it has to be worked out specific timetable and roadmap to do away with the potential risk of nuclear proliferation and nuclear safety. And this has to be done by the IEA, which I think the only international organization for related safeguard, verification, and so on and so forth.
Okay, thank you. That was Rong Ying, Chair Professor at the School of International Studies at Sichuan University. Coming up, the United States moves to reopen the Strait of Hormuz by force as Iran attacks the UAE. This is World Today. Stay tuned.
Hello, I'm Yan Liang, Kramer Chair Professor of Economics at Willamette University. In a rapidly changing world, staying informed has never been more important. World Today delivers sharp analysis, global perspectives, and the stories behind the headlines. It is your trusted source to understand what's shaping our world. World Today, bringing the world closer.
This is World Today. Tensions have escalated in the Gulf region as the United States launched a military operation to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. It prompted Iranian retaliation and missile and drone attacks on the United Arab Emirates. The UAE's foreign ministry accused Iran of attacking civilian sites, causing a large fire at the key oil port of Fujairah. A pipeline from the oil fields of Abu Dhabi runs to the port, allowing crude to be loaded onto tankers and shipped to world markets despite the strait being blockaded. Middle East nations including Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar have condemned the Iranian attacks. Iran said it has no plans to target the UAE, while accusing the country of cooperating with aggressors against Tehran. With more, joining us on the line is Greg Barton, Professor of Global Islamic Politics at Deakin University. Thank you so much for joining us, Professor. First of all, what do you see as the main triggers behind the U.S. decision to launch a military operation to reopen the Strait of Hormuz?
I think what we're seeing is US impatience, particularly on the part of President Trump, and a misunderstanding about what it will take to bring the regime in Tehran to the negotiating table. I think this is a miscalculation that military pressure will force Iran to negotiate, but in fact it has the potential to go the opposite direction. Iran feels it has the upper hand and it can withstand months and months of military action, so it doesn't need to rush to negotiations.
And given Iran's tightening control over the strait, how feasible is such an operation in practice?
I think most experts who look at this agree that there's no military solution to opening the straits. So initially, I think President Trump's team felt that imposing a second blockade outside the straits to blockade Iranian ships and vessels that Iranian had allowed to pass the Strait of Hormuz, that this would give them some leverage. But I think they've found out that that's not working, that Iran is not showing any signs of buckling. Hence, this more deliberate strategy of trying to force the strait open. But there's no military solution to open the strait. There's a combination of insurmountable difficulties, whether that's the possibility of stray mines in the strait and the fact that you're passing close to the Iranian coastline where you're very vulnerable to drone and missile attack, as well as potentially underwater and surface drones. So whether it's fast boats or effectively torpedoes targeting ships, it's really difficult to defend against in military terms, and conventional American-style military defensive measures don't work against those small drones or missiles. And the proximity means that the closing time is so short that you can't defend yourself. So it's a difficult situation for the US military to be in, particularly the US Navy, and they have no good solution. So they won't be able to prevail militarily. It'll have to be a negotiation at the end of the day.
Now, the U.S. and Iran have exchanged fire in the Strait of Hormuz. Professor, how big is the risk of hostilities resuming?
Well, I think we've got three scenarios now. One is that, in fact, after a few days, America and Iran do negotiate, accepting that they need to find a diplomatic off-ramp. I think the fact that President Trump is due in Beijing at the end of next week possibly means that might give a timeline, and so there's still that possibility of negotiated exit. If that doesn't work, I think the next possibility is that the blockade continues. If it continues for more than a month or two, the impact on the global economy will be enormous. But in the midst of that, the third possibility arises, and that is that there will be an exchange of fire. If American or other ships are hit by Iran, America's going to respond, and then it can really escalate into open conflict, such as we saw before the ceasefire, and that's not going to end well. There's no good solutions there if it goes to that. So the best scenario is some sort of negotiations is emerging over the next 10 days. If the blockade continues, economic pressure will hit the rest of the world harder than it will hit Iran. But it also increases the risk of a military escalation, which could see major damage across the Gulf, not just oil and gas infrastructure being damaged, but even desalination plants and civilian infrastructure, which could be devastating.
Now, the current conflict marks the first time that the UAE has come under attack since the ceasefire. What does it signal about the trajectory of the Middle East tensions?
We're seeing a splitting now in the Gulf states. Saudi Arabia has sort of moved in one direction, working on a sort of more enduring peace deal with the Houthis in the Red Sea that enables them to get their oil and gas out through the Red Sea. So they're splitting from the UAE. The UAE, basically, Tehran is saying, we see you in the same camp as America and Israel, and we're going to treat you as such. So it's an attempt to split the Gulf states. It'll be interesting to see what happens with Bahrain and Qatar. But basically, I think the Gulf states are very vulnerable. Those American bases that they thought offered protection have been shown not to offer protection. All of the American bases are out of action. The Iranians were able to deal with those bases remarkably quickly. And I think that leaves the UAE feeling very exposed. So they too will need to recognize there's not a military solution. There'll have to be some negotiation before this gets much worse.
Now here's this confusing thing. Iran retaliated with missile and drone attacks on the UAE while insisting it had not deliberately targeted the country and accusing it of cooperating with aggressors against Tehran. So how do you interpret Iran's explanation, and what specific cooperation is Iran referring to?
I think what the regime in Tehran is trying to say to UAE is if you choose to fight back, if you choose to engage with us in a military way, we'll treat you as being an ally of America and Israel, and you'll be open to the full onset of our power. And of course, UAE lies a short distance across the water from the Iranian mainland, so it's very vulnerable. It's America and Israel are not able or willing to protect it. And of all the Emirates of Dubai, the city of Dubai has depended on trade with Iran. It's been a major point of contact between Iran and the Arab world. And so this is quite a turning point for Iran to turn on the UAE and say, if you fight with us, then we're going to treat you as an enemy. That's a real deterioration in the stability that the Gulf has known.
Now, the UAE's key oil port, Fujairah, was on fire due to the attacks, sending oil prices sharply higher. How far-reaching could this impact be?
This could be the beginning of things really unraveling and a major scare with oil and gas prices. So Fujairah is that port on the eastern side of the peninsula that juts into the Strait of Hormuz. It sits just under a bit of that peninsula occupied by Oman, and it means that ships can dock in Fujairah and take oil and gas out without passing through the Strait of Hormuz. But it's still very close to the Iranian mainland, so it's very vulnerable to attacks. We don't know how severe this current attack has been, but whether this attack is devastating or whether it simply marks a warning for further attacks, it's possible for Iran to completely destroy operations in Fujairah. And Fujairah has the capacity to take as much as half of the oil and gas production of the UAE. So if that's taken offline, it means that nothing is coming out from the Gulf states except for what Saudi Arabia is able to send out through pipelines to the Red Sea and beyond. And I think that's when we will begin to see a real panic with oil and gas markets and related commodities like urea and ammonia and helium. And that's when we price in sort of long-term economic shock. So this is potentially a major escalation.
Now, Germany said it will deploy a mine hunter to the Mediterranean. Its defense minister said any potential German naval deployment to the strait would be contingent on a cessation of hostilities. Meanwhile, France said it'll participate in safeguarding navigation in the strait when conditions permit. So how will their decisions affect the conflict dynamics in the Gulf region?
I think what these European states, Germany and France and others are trying to say is that we're prepared to be part of a solution in terms of restoring stability, but we can't generate that stability and we can't make a breakthrough solution by ourselves. So the regime in Tehran has said that they've put mines in the Strait of Hormuz and they've lost track of where those mines are, and the suggestion is some of those mines are floating free. So there would be a need for a demining operation. So what Germany is saying is if you can negotiate an end to the blockade in the strait, we'll be part of cleaning things up and helping maintain some stability there. So this would come after a negotiated solution. It can't by itself produce a negotiated solution because the French and the British and the Germans know that if they go into the Strait of Hormuz when there's still ongoing hostilities, if Iran targets them, they're very vulnerable. I mean, they in peacetime can conduct demining operations, but they can't do it under fire.
Thank you very much. That was Greg Barton, Professor of Global Islamic Politics at Deakin University. You're listening to World Today. To listen to this episode again or to catch up on previous episodes, you can download our podcast by searching World Today. We'll be back after a short break.
Hello, my name is Alessandro Golombiewski Teixeira. I'm a professor of public policy and management at Tsinghua University in Beijing. I am a great listener of the World Today. In my opinion, The World Today is one of the best China radio programs. In The World Today, we can get the best news and analysis in what is happening now in the world. So please come to join us.
You're listening to World Today. Germany has warned that the European Union is prepared to take countermeasures if the United States moves ahead with plans to sharply increase tariffs on European automobile imports. German Vice Chancellor and Finance Minister Lars Kleinbeil urged Washington to honor a previous tariff agreement reached with the EU, cautioning against further escalation. His remarks came after U.S. President Donald Trump said in a social media post that Washington would increase tariffs on EU-made cars this week. Trump accused the bloc of failing to comply with a bilateral trade deal, adding that the new policy would impose a 25% tariff on European cars, while exempting vehicles manufactured in the U.S. Now, joining us on the line is Muhammad Ali Nasir, professor of economics at the University of Leeds. He's also a visiting fellow at the University of Cambridge and a visiting professor at Peking University. Thank you for joining us, Professor. First of all, Trump accused the EU of failing to comply with a bilateral trade deal. How credible is this accusation? Is it the real reason behind his decision?
To some extent, there is some rationale, you can say. For instance, the deal between the EU and US was agreed last year here in UK in July. And although the US moved very quickly in implementation, however, the EU stalled. The progress on the European parts has been a little bit slow, and there are reasons for that. There are institutional reasons for that. EU is a bloc of 27 countries, and it takes more time for legislation to pass and be implemented. However, there have been some other factors. For instance, there was a Greenland crisis where US and Mr. Trump threatened to take over the Greenland. And in January this year, then the European Parliament suspended the approval of deal because of that Greenland crisis. Later in February, the Supreme Court also ruled out that the reciprocal tariffs imposed by Mr. Trump last year and the trade war was illegal. And that was also a factor which might have affected the implementation of the deal and might have frustrated Mr. Trump a little bit. However, the deal has been passed and there's been slow progress, and the European Union officials, they say that their position is that they've been informing the American counterparts about the progress and it would be implemented. So it's not that they are backing off. In terms of what could be the real reasons, I mean, we could say that Mr. Trump is a little bit frustrated with the European Union, specifically in context of the Middle East. They refused to join Trump military adventures in the Middle East. And that might have frustrated Mr. Trump a little bit. More recently, the remarks by the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz that US has really no exit strategy in Middle East in relation to Iran and war with Iran. Those factors might be contributing factor which might have frustrated Mr. Trump, and he made this announcement. And in the past, we did see that Mr. Trump makes announcements on the social media and then he backtracks on those announcements. So there could be different factors playing into it. But yes, this is the context of, I think, Mr. Trump, this specific announcement.
And how would a 25% US tariff on EU automobiles affect the EU auto industry, particularly Germany's?
Yes, I mean the EU economy unfortunately is not in a very good shape, and also the German economy is not very good shape. And I mean, if we look at just GDP figures, the largest economies in the EU, like Italy, France, and Germany, for this year, 2026, their projected growth by IMF or the GDP growth is less than 1% of each. None of these countries are expected to grow more than 1% in this year. And specifically Germany, the growth projections are about 0.2%. Now, this war with Iran has an energy crisis for the Europe has made the situation worse. And on top of that, if the trade war escalates with the EU, with the USA, that would be a very bad news for the Germany. German automobile sector is a backbone of German industrial base and German economy. More than 2 million jobs are directly or indirectly related to this sector. So definitely it's going to have a very bad and severe negative impact on the German economy. I mean, there are different estimates. Some projections suggest there might be a negative impact of well over 2 billion on the automobile sector in Germany, and the overall losses could be in excess of 15 billion euros for Germany. But German economy, as I said, is already in troubles. On top of that, if there are tariffs like that, that would not help the German economy at all.
If the U.S. proceeds with this tariff hike, what specific countermeasures is the EU likely to implement?
Yes, I mean the EU officials have signaled that they would retaliate. Mr. Bernd Lange, who is the chair of European Parliament Trade Committee, he has said that this is unacceptable, and it shows the US is an unreliable partner. So this would be indeed violation of deal, and on the US part, if they increase the tariffs, and that would mean that the EU could say that, okay, well, if you are doing that, we are going to delay the implementation of the deal on our part. So we are not reducing the tariffs or taking the measures we agree to. They can, of course, escalate. They can impose tariffs on the imports that are coming from the US. For instance, the agricultural products, they can put tariffs on them. They can also use other non-tariff measures. For instance, their intellectual property legislation or antitrust measures, they can use them. And US is also a large services exporter to EU. It actually runs a surplus in services. So that could also be targeted by EU. But I think it would be too early to say anything, because at the moment this is just an announcement by Mr. Trump. And we know Mr. Trump threatens countries and then he usually chickens out. So we will see whether he walks the talk or not. But yeah, EU has tools and different options on the table which they can exercise if needed.
Okay, thank you very much. That was Muhammad Ali Nasir, professor of economics at the University of Leeds. He's also a visiting fellow at the University of Cambridge and a visiting professor at Peking University. Coming up, China's service sector drives growth with artificial intelligence unlocking new potential. This is World Today. We'll be back.
Welcome. I am Chu Zhang, Deputy Director at the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at Fudan University. On the World Today program, we will dive beyond the headlines to uncover the stories, trends, and impacts that connect states across the globe. Join me on World Today.
Welcome back. China's services sector is showing strong growth momentum driven by advances in artificial intelligence. This comes as the country targets a $14 trillion services sector by 2030, a 25% increase from last year's level. In an interview with my colleague Liu Shen, Professor He Ping says that beyond AI, data technologies and green services will also help foster new business models and sustain growth. Professor He is Associate Dean of the School of Economics and Management at Beijing's Tsinghua University.
Let's talk about the service sector of China. I want to share some numbers just to give people an idea. For instance, the total size of China's service sector has already surpassed $12 trillion. That's at the end of last year. And then there are three numbers which are very important: 60, 60, and 50. 60 because service now accounts for 60% of China's GDP. It's 60% of China's GDP growth last year, and it accounts 50% of China's total employment. Give us a big understanding of how important, how big is China's service sector already?
Compare with developed countries, I think there's a lot of space for China's service sector to grow. For example, in the United States, the service sector accounts for more than 80% of GDP. We only have like 60% and with 50% of employment, which means we have a lot of space to grow. I think this is a good news for us, which means in the future, there will be a very good potential to develop service sector in China.
Mm-hmm. What do you think of the 60%, for instance, in terms of GDP growth? Service sector contributed for 60% of China's GDP growth. How significant is that?
This is also very significant. I think it accounts for 60% of the GDP growth, which means that it already become the majority and the major part of the growth, the major source of growth. I think this portion will become larger in the future. In particular, in China, high value added service, as well as manufacturing service, etc. A lot of new service products will emerge in the future.
Now, I was talking about the size of China's service sector being about $12 trillion for last year. And, China has this planning system. So we have laid out the next 5-year plan, which is from 2025 to 2030. And it's expected that the service sector will grow to be as strong as 15 trillion US dollars. That's 100 trillion yuan. How does China have the confidence that it can achieve this goal? And what will be the key drivers behind this growth?
First of all, from 12 trillion to 15 trillion in 5 years is not a big deal for China. It only takes like 4 to 5% of growth per year. So we'll achieve that goal. Second, I think with the technology development, in particular with the data technology and AI technology, I think we'll create a lot of new models for service in China. And also green service is also a big part of this service sector growth as well. And in China also, we need a lot of high value added service, high quality service in healthcare and senior care. In traveling, that you just mentioned, we do need a lot of high value added service as well. So there's a lot of space to grow. New products, new services, a combination of service and products, combination of manufacturing services, as well as, AI application generating new business models in service sector. There's too much space to grow. I think this is a very conservative estimate to grow to $15 billion. I think it could be $20 billion.
Wow.
Well, if we do it right.
Do the right thing.
Do the right thing.
Yeah. Well, as you mentioned, new things will emerge, for instance, new models and new consumption patterns. What could be some of the new consumption models and service scenarios that we can expect to emerge? And how is that going to change people's way of leading their lives?
There are just many things could occur in the near future. For example, the AI application in people's daily life. We could use the AI agent to do the planning for our traveling, and we use the AI for work to design the working schedule. Also, there will be integration of manufacturing and services. First of all, a lot of products will be sold along with a lot of service products. For example, if you buy a car, then it could be like a map tool on it, and also connecting to a lot of other services. If you buy a cell phone, it will come with other products, many service products as well. Secondly, I think in the manufacturing sector, we also need a production service, which means we use the tools to improve the efficiency in manufacturing, like planning, like scheduling, like logistics, like legal services, like strategy consulting.
After sale.
After sale services, like compliance services, like risk management. All these type of services for manufacturing for the goods production is also a big part of this.
What kind of new scenarios are being created with the introduction of AI? How, new scenarios being created, and what impact could this have?
I think the technology just makes our life much more colorful. Originally, for example, the AIMAC, it just give you the route to a destiny, give you a faster route. for now. But now it used to be just reactive. You give the app an order, they will give you an answer. But in the future, it will be much more proactive and immersive. He could automatically provide other products and services for the suggestion. And also it could make your experience much, much more immersive, like you really in it. This is, I think, a big change of our life.
What kind of opportunities is this AI plus services creating for foreign businesses? I understand, the investment in high-tech sector, especially of foreign direct investment, really shot up 30% in the first quarter of this year. So what opportunities lie in AI plus services for foreign businesses?
Yeah, I think there's just a lot of opportunities for foreign investors as well. And for example, as I mentioned, there's a high value added services. In China, the old model is very low price, long hours,
cheap
labors. But now with the assistance of AI, high quality service will become much more accessible in China. So I certainly improve the quality of this kind of trade services.
What kind of risks do you think there may be? And what kind of bottlenecks?
The biggest risk is probably the governance of new technology. And technology is neutral. It could bring good things. It can also equally likely bring bad things. So for example, people use AI to improve their quality. Certainly, we now see a lot of people use AI tool to cheat as well. And sometimes our privacy is not well protected. Yeah, so this could be a big concern as well.
What's China's approach to addressing these bottlenecks?
I think China should improve the legislation in this area for the governance in AI. Also try to break this local protectionism. Also, I think training workforce is important. Yeah, because not only we need people who have the new demand, know the new demand, but also we need people who can provide these services. We need to train people to learn the technology, how to use the new technology as well.
That was He Ping from Tsinghua University talking to Liu Xin. Coming up, a young Chinese snooker player wins 2026 World Championship in historic victory. This is World Today. Stay tuned.
Chinese company Landbridge is fighting to hold on to Darwin Port after Australia singled it out as a potential target in its bid to reclaim the lease. Landbridge has launched arbitration at the International Center for Settlement of Investment Disputes, potentially the first investor-state case the Australian government will face at the World Bank body. How did a routine commercial deal turn into a national security flashpoint? Who's likely to prevail in arbitration? And what does this mean for China-Australia ties, investor confidence, and the future of global investment rules? Get them all at this week's Chat Lounge, wherever you listen to podcasts, and on CGTN Radio.
You're listening to World Today. Snooker player Wu Yize has become the second world champion from China. He defeated Triple Crown winner Sean Murphy at the Crucible Theatre in the UK. At 22, Wu is the second youngest world champion, behind only Stephen Hendry in 1990. His victory follows Zhao Xingtong, who 12 months ago became the first ever world champion from Asia, a milestone in a sport long dominated by Britain. For more, my colleague Song Rixin spoke with Paul Dunn, co-founder of EI Asia Limited.
So Wu Yize defeated Sean Murphy in the final, and Murphy is a British star and a Triple Crown winner. Just how difficult is it to beat a player of that caliber in a Crucible decider?
Yes, Sean Murphy is very famous here in China and also around the global snooker community. And he is no stranger to snooker fans. And of course, those active players, some of them even older, several years older than Murphy, are still around and playing and remain very competitive. And many of them can be even more decorated in terms of titles that have won by those players. But Murphy is in a perfect shape. And I myself, in my own perspective, before the World Championships, in the Crucible, I thought that there might be 3 top contenders for the title this year, and Murphy was one of them, based on his performance over the last few, tournaments. He has been playing so amazingly well, and he has been also very determined trying to stop the Chinese upcoming stars from taking the titles or crowns too easily. And people are familiar with this, nature, and also, the kind of chemistry of competing against Murphy for the Chinese players. And of course, he was a champion of World Championship back in 22 years ago in 2005. And this was to be his fifth final in his career. And that is amazing. And it would turn out to be a very, very tough competition when it comes to 35 frames. Maximum 35 frames between a very inexperienced player from China and this so experienced and so informed player, kind of a masterclass player.
Last year it was Zhao Xintong, and this time the champion is even younger. So what explains this phenomenon? How has Chinese snooker produced back-to-back world champions?
Yes, I just mentioned, the top contenders for this year's World Championship.
Yeah.
I didn't have Wu Yize, actually. I would pick Zhao Xintong, Sean Murphy, and maybe the world number one, Zhao Trump. But Wu Yize just surprised everybody. He had the potential. He had the talent before coming into the championship. He was already a top 10 player entering this year's championship, but he is only 22, and experience and his style would be a concern for many veteran players who care to follow him, and like Ding Junhui, and also the legendary 1975 player like Ronnie O'Sullivan. And they have been quite supportive and helpful, but nobody was so sure that a 22-year-old from China would had launched such an attack on the crown, on the title. And he turned out to be, compared with Zhao Xintong was already 28 last year, and he is 29 now, quite experienced and mature. And even Zhao Xintong couldn't, hold on to compete against such a talented, smartly playing Sean Murphy. And then very few people would expect Wu Yize to be that strong, so mature when under so much pressure. And it turned out to be that he is a very, very, grown up player compared with his own age. And from Zhao Xintong and to Wu Yize, and you just mentioned that two consecutive Chinese winners of the World Championship really startled the snooker world.
Okay, so it feels like a real golden generation coming through. You talked about Ding Junhui. Of course, fans can't help but think of Ding Junhui. He came so close before. And for Asian players, especially Chinese players, what makes winning at the Crucible so challenging?
I think it's more like in our Chinese saying that, the paper in front of you, stopping you is already very thin, but can you figure out how to peer through it? And sometimes it does take some effort, some experience, and also, a bit of luck. And you have to be patient enough waiting for your opponent to make mistakes. Normally 22 years old or even 32 years old wouldn't guarantee you to be fit and up for that level, because this is the World Championship, the biggest title among the Triple Crown you just mentioned. Mm-hmm. And you also talked about Ding Junhui, and he is the figure and also the witness and also the very first iconic player who can tell you the entire history, the entire thing, or the China story in snooker. Because back in the 1990s, early 1990s, when I was a sports writer or sports reporter representing CRI, and I had opportunities to interview some of the most outstanding ambassadors representing snooker from the Western world coming to China to introduce and market snooker as a brand new sport and a game in China. I was an eyewitness during those occasions. Davis and Hundley, and among many others, and came to China one after another, were in groups because they had a big eye, a very big vision for China to develop into a new stronghold, a new market for snooker, and maybe even one much bigger than what Britain used to be, or the UK wants to be. And China now is so rich of talented players following one another, and some even younger than Weizhe are promising to succeed him and even achieve even bigger results.
Well, if we look at the journey that he's been through, I guess it must inspire a whole new generation back home. Wu is from Lanzhou, a city in northwest China. It's not a traditional snooker city, actually. I know this well because I'm from Lanzhou. Although he relocated to the UK from his home city of Lanzhou at the age of 16, what does this victory mean for a place like Lanzhou? And more broadly, how big is the impact on smaller or less developed cities in China when they produce a world champion?
Yeah, maybe, as you said, Lanzhou or Gansu or some of the other provinces in northwestern China may not be the most economically advanced regions in this country, but I think we can wait a little more patiently for more statistics to come in to impress us that, whether northwestern China has less or even more players on the grassroots level playing snooker. Maybe there are more than we can expect, than we imagine. Because now, among the most talented and promising snooker players in China, around the same age as Weizhe, there are several others from northwestern China. Of course, Zhao Xintong was born in Shenzhen in southern China, a very developed area. But a lot of Xi'an people will think he is a Xi'an native because his parents are from Xi'an, and Weizhe from Lanzhou, and Fan Zhengyi, and also another marvelous talented player is Chang Bingyu from Qinghai, if I'm correct. Several of them from northwestern China. And of course, Weizhe's parents were absolutely among the most dedicated, most determined parents. They have given up so much to support their son, and I think it's very, very fair, also a bit lucky for them to see the outcome of such efforts to emerge so fast and so soon. And I think everyone can be very moved by the story behind the family, and you can't do anything but to wish them good luck. And they deserve everything they are witnessing now.
That was Paul Dong, co-founder of EI Asia Limited, speaking with my colleague Song Rui Xin. That's all the time for this edition of World Today. To listen to this episode again or to catch up on previous episodes, you can download our podcast by searching for World Today. I'm Do Hongyu in Beijing. Thank you so much for listening. Bye for now.